Welcome to Storytime with Papa Henry. And we are reading the book Captain Daly's Crew and the Long-Eared Taxicab by Craig Massey. Today we are ready to begin chapter 4, Going to the Birds. Have you ever heard that expression before, going to the birds?
No.
Yeah, and when somebody says something's going to the birds, that means they're doing something that's of no importance, or they're off on something. In this case, they really are going to the birds because they're trying to record bird music, right? Let's find out what happens. We returned to the lodge and related our experiences with the Jamesons. Of course, Jennifer Petronella came in for about half the conversation, and we described how Jennifer Jameson resented not only the donkey, but us also. Captain Daly spoke up. Remember, boys, there's a lot of having fun in life, and it's grand to have adventures. But always remember, when you meet folks like the Jamesons, you have a great responsibility. You're Christians. Each one of you has received Christ as your personal Savior. It's up to you to tell others of Christ, and it looks to me as though you have a little missionary work cut out for you and that family. Good night, Slim said soberly. That Jennifer is about the most unfriendly girl I've ever met. I can't even imagine her listening to us. Why, before Chuck prayed at supper tonight, she muttered that it was an ancient custom, and after the prayer, she said real sarcastically, "How quaint." I'd rather talk to a stone wall than try to talk to her. Slim, the captain said reprovingly, it's just that kind of people who need the Lord. So you better get rid of that attitude. Pudge sighed. I guess I better get rid of my attitude too. That girl got me a little bit peeved today, running down Petronella the way she did. The conversation drifted on, and after the captain read the second chapter of Philippians from the Bible, which is a chapter telling how we should put others first, we went to bed and set the alarm clock for 3:30. I can tell you now, it was a shivery morning and as dark as the inside of a black walnut that hadn't been cracked yet as we made our way up Wanderlust Trail. This is for the birds, Slim grunted, using a phrase we passed around in school. You can say that again, Pudge yawned as a Baltimore Oriole whistled his opening song to the new day. Mr. Jameson was waiting for us with the recording equipment ready. Chuck and I carefully carried the reflector. Slim carried the machine, and Pudge carried a long length of cord with a half a dozen heavy bolts tied to one end. I was about to ask what it was for when Mr. Jameson spoke softly. We'll move along the lake shore, and from here on, don't speak at all. You boys with the reflector, watch me. Slim, as soon as I hear a bird, I'll motion Chuck and Gary to focus the sound reflector, and I'll signal you as soon as the mic is in position. And you flip this switch. And he touched a black indicator on the recording machine. It was a clumsy task, moving that cumbersome reflector through brush and over stones without any noise. I can tell you that. Well, add to that just the tiniest dash of early morning light, and you can guess what we were up against. Birds of all kinds were singing their songs now, but I supposed, and later I found out it was correct, that there were too many singing together, and thus the recording would have been a hodgepodge symphony of music instead of a solo bird. Finally, we reached a point near a heavy growth of scrub pines. I caught the sound of a soft woo-hoo, with the last syllable rising in pitch and trailing off. I'd heard it before. It was a mourning dove. Instantly, Mr. Jameson touched us, and guided by his hands, we centered the reflector in the dove's direction. Vaguely, I saw Slim flip on the recorder. The dove cooperated beautifully. Time after time, his plaintive, crying cooing filled the air. By this time, I'd been so rigid holding the disc, I was ready to let it clatter at the slightest signal, especially since the dove stopped its song. Mr. Jameson made no move, and a moment later I was glad he didn't, for the mourning dove had moved closer to us, not more than 20 feet away. 5 more minutes passed. Then Mr. Jameson whispered, "Perfect. I think we caught the dove singing alone about 3 times." In my interest in the dove, I had forgotten all about the other birds, but now I heard in the distance the same variety that had been singing earlier. To the left of us, and only about 15 feet away, the strengthening light showed the surface of the lake. Along the edge were lily pads extending about 20 feet out. Immediately in front of us was a marshy mass of cat-o'-nine-tails. Several blackbirds moved into these swaying reeds. Again, the reflector was arranged and the recording mechanism put into motion. I began to study the whistled notes and found they seemed to say over and over again the words, "Oh, gurgly, oh, gurgly." There were 4 of the birds. Over half the time, 2 or more were whistling together. But now and then a single bird would sing his solo song. These, I sensed, were what Mr. Jameson wanted. After 10 minutes, I heard another sound close by. Mr. Jameson motioned us to swing the reflector to the west. At first I couldn't recognize the newcomers, but slowly it dawned on me that a duck was moving toward us. But the blackbirds were joined by 3 others, and although the duck came close, he never had a chance to sing a solo. Mr. Jameson motioned to Slim to shut off the recorder and said, "There's no use trying for him anymore with those noisy blackbirds so close." Chuck sighed wistfully. "I've heard birds singing all my life, but I never enjoyed anything like this." "Fascinating, isn't it?" Mr. Jameson agreed. "It sure is," said Chuck. I remembered what Captain Daly had said about our responsibility to Mr. Jameson and his family. So I said softly, "Isn't it wonderful how the Lord gave every one of those birds an entirely different song? You'd sort of think that singing together like that, they'd all get used to one song and stick to that. But no siree. The Lord created those melodies, and they're all different." Mr. Jameson said nothing about my comment, but did say, "Let's work up to those poplar trees." The sun burst across the eastern hills. The new day was here, beautiful, clear, and tangy as a glass of cold mountain spring water. Mr. Jameson studied the top of one of the trees. "Oh, kingbirds! See them?" I saw several birds, smaller than robins, dark gray in color, with narrow white bands around the outside fringe of their tails, flipping crazy-like through the air. Along with their flipping, there was an incessant, nervous chattering song that seemed full of words like, "Zee, tease, please, tease." These birds belong to the flycatcher family. "That's what they're doing now," Mr. Jameson said. Chuck spoke up. "The reflector wouldn't help when the birds are that far away, would it?" "No, that's where this string comes in." Mr. Jameson took the string from Pudge and dropped the coil to the ground, and then carefully recoiled the entire length at his feet. Then he took the end fastened to the bolts and twirled it in a circle. Suddenly, he let it fly up, up, up over one of the high limbs of the poplar. The bolts carried the string down to the ground some distance away. The kingbirds, of course, flew out of sight. "Good," Mr. Jameson said. "Good? The birds are gone!" Pudge moaned. "I mean good, the string went over the branch. Now, if you'll go get it for me, Pudge, I'll show you what I'm going to do." Pudge retrieved the bolt-weighted string, and Mr. Jameson removed the bolts and fastened the mic to the end where they had been. "Now," he exclaimed, "I'll just pull this end." And as he said this, he drew gently at one end of the cord. The mic moved up until it was nestled high above us in a clump of leaves. "Now we just fasten this end to this cedar and forget our kingbirds for a while and go home for breakfast. We have to take the machine too," he explained, as he unplugged the microphone from the recorder. for dampness wouldn't do the mechanism any good. We'll come back after a while, and we'll find our kingbird friends flipping around as usual. Won't the mic frighten them? Chuck asked. Not as long as it isn't moving. They soon become accustomed to it. We returned to camp. Neither Mrs. Jameson nor Jennifer were up, so we rustled breakfast. And if I do say so myself, it was delicious, although the tea and pancakes had a distinct flavor of wood smoke. About an hour later, we returned to the poplar tree, and sure enough, the kingbirds were there singing away for us. Back at camp again, we played over the recordings, and I want to tell you, it was about as thrilling an experience as I've had. Those birds sounded just as they did earlier. Chuck piped up. Actually, Mr. Jameson, you only managed to get clear-cut recordings of the mourning dove, the blackbirds, and the kingbirds. All the others are sort of a blend of various songs. Yes, that's right, Chuck. Now my job will be to cut and piece the tape together so that finally we'll have each bird singing distinctly by itself. The rest we'll discard and try again. Of course, our job this morning was comparatively easy. These birds are numerous and not hard to record. After I exhaust the easier varieties, we'll have to work harder. The next chapter is called The Little Old Man.
Little old man, little old man.